Data protection is a top priority with today's work-from-home workforce. However, current data loss prevention tools inadequately protect data in cloud or SaaS offerings from insider threats. Secure Circle automatically protects data as it leaves SaaS services such as GitHub, AWS, and Salesforce. The protection is transparent to users and works with any application to persistently protect data, even source code. Secure your data with Secure Circle's Zero Trust Data Protection. Begin your 30-day free trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Secure Circle. Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. If you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to your favorite podcast catcher or on our YouTube channel or our mailing list or our Discord server. Make sure you do that, securityweekly.com/subscribe. We already started talking about asset management because it's just that important, right? It's awesome.
If you say so.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting. John was talking about passive asset management and the companies knowing like what I have. Like, do you have that on your network? Like, I don't know. And I was doing some security research and I was like, well, it'd be interesting to know if these kind of devices are on the network. And I noticed that the app that was associated with this particular device, when you install the app on any kind of phone or tablet or any kind of app platform, it would come up, the app would load, and it would show you all the devices that were on the network. And I was like, that's really interesting because, one, I haven't entered any credentials, and two, I haven't told it anything about my network whatsoever. I've merely started the app. And I'm like, I need to break out my packet capture tool. Turns out, sends a packet to the broadcast address, and all those type devices respond. I'm like, is that exist out there? Are there open? I remember seeing research here and there, like when you land on a network, that you can do a lot of things with the broadcast address. Is that an open source thing and commercial thing? Is that in use today? I'm sure.
I'm sure it's everywhere. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can get assets in the traditional sense of the term asset, right? And we were talking about this during the break. HD Moore does some great stuff with the Rumble product and the open source version. Maybe not open source. I think he's got a free version. But whatever the case may be, right? The real question that I have isn't necessarily traditional asset management when we're thinking of it from the network layer, which is what you're talking about. Because there's a couple different ways there. You've got active and passive versions of data collection there. Both inside and outside the network. But
right. Well, in all the different segments, right? My example, Tyler, falls flat. It actually works well if it's a flat network, but if it's segmented in any way and then cloud, exactly.
Well, go beyond that, right? So I think the real future of asset management is redefining the term asset. So not thinking of asset as an IP or individual device, but let's flip that on its head, given that, everything's software defined now in the cloud, not even on your physical network. And what if we defined asset as an asset for your business? So a device, an IP address, a cloud workload, a GitHub repository, a commit, a human identity. These are all the assets of the business.
Agreed.
And discovering that breadth of asset is where you find the real value in modern asset management.
Yeah, because I think it's, okay, we've got Microsoft Office 365, we've got OneDrive, but there's a lot of different assets out there. Like, how many different shares and SharePoint sites do I have? Like, there's one thing to have OneDrive, Google Drive enabled. It's another thing to know what are the assets inside of that? And then you can put that in any kind of cloud or SaaS model and go, okay, yeah, it's a difference maybe, Tyler, between a service and the assets within that service. And I think that's where I'd like to, as a consumer of these products, I'd like to have visibility into, right? One thing to have this service spun up, maybe another business unit has the same service, that's fine. But from a security point of view, we like to know about everything, much like accountants and in similar fields, in medicine, maybe healthcare. We got to know about everything that's going on 100%. And so I want to know what's inside of those particular services.
Yeah, and in the last segment, we were talking about the importance of automation in a lot of security, just because there's our time is limited and there's so much to go through, and it's never as true as with asset management, because it's a huge job. Even if you take like a traditional enterprise network with even a flat network. That's a huge job. Then you segment that up. Then you have hosted stuff offsite. You got maybe your DR environment that nobody thinks about, most of the time, and they forget the stuff that's there. Nobody's patching it. And then you get into the cloud. Like how do you know if a couple of your developers have separate AWS accounts outside your visibility, but they're actually putting production data there, or maybe just test environments, but are still using proprietary company data and stuff like that.
As asset management, if we abstract away, we still need to pay attention to the concept of an IP address and an endpoint. But if you abstract that away, just like the enterprise is doing by abstracting away those things into the cloud, anyways, right? If we abstract that away from a CMDB model, you start to get into things that are higher order. And what really matters to people isn't necessarily how many devices do I have, but starting to understand the relationships between assets. So for example, I find a vuln in a web app. Okay, well, I want to know what web app it was, what commit had the vuln, who committed the vuln through what repo, and how much training did that particular person have? Well, if we think of all of those things as assets in the stack that I described, you could start to make really cool relationship correlations between cyber assets. And that's the future of cyber asset security, is not just saying how many endpoints do I have, but what are the connections and relationships between my identities and my cloud workloads and my commits and my vulns.
Yeah. Well, I think who owns all those assets, right? Right. I like your example of the developer, so I know who made the commit. But Adrian, I think that's some of your
big thing, Paul.
Go ahead, Adrian. Sorry.
Yeah. Who owns those assets? That's a great point, because what you end up with, and this is something I chat with a lot of companies about, is that in most large companies you're going to have several asset management repositories. Like if you're in charge of issuing laptops to employees, corporate-owned laptops. You're going to have some kind of asset management system that has very different data in it, than the security folks are looking at. And there's very specific things that you need there. So, in a lot of these large organizations, you need to have those conversations, and there needs to be some collaboration and discussion between these different groups. Because the IT and network folks have different needs from an asset management platform than the security folks. And that usually results in having several different products that are doing some amount of overlapping in terms of gathering that information, maintaining that information. One system might be very out of date because it's not using as much automation, or it's, new network segments were added and nobody went into the system to add them. So usually you see them completely out of sync with each other. So it's a tough problem when you consider the workflows within the organization, who owns the assets and who has control over those assets as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting intersection to both of your points, that we traditionally think of asset management as accounting. They have to pay the bills, so they know about the software and stuff that you have to pay bills on, right? And then physical hardware. You've got, remember the asset tags, right? We used to see it all, and I'm sure it still exists today. Like it's a physical sticker, that you're putting on something. And there were individual groups that were very concerned and needed that to perform their functions within the enterprise. as security, Tyler, I like your point. It's about knowing the relationship between those assets more so than that they exist. Existing is one thing. I want to know who owns them and how they're related to what other pieces and parts of the organization.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think, the key thing, because it doesn't matter what an individual asset does. What matters is how they all work together. And what we're seeing, so I for those that don't know, that are watching me for the first time, I'm the CMO of a company called Jupiter One, and we're reinventing CMD. We're a cyber asset management and governance platform. And what our customers are finding is they may have 100,000, 10,000, or 1 million assets, and what they're actually end up ingesting is about 3 to 4 times that in relationship patterns get ingested into our Graph DB to understand how all of these things interoperate, because any one asset's irrelevant without the relationship data that you can layer on top and query against.
Yeah, and there's a maturity curve here, right? Because what I often find is if you're putting some effort into what you would deem air quotes asset management, you may know you've got an instance of this particular software or technology, right? If you're a little better, you may know that you've got like maybe the main production instance and a few maybe dev and test environments that you maybe didn't know if you were just doing kind of table stakes asset management. But what the intelligence we need as security professionals is, well, yeah, I've got the production one, I know about that. And I've got this dev one, and this dev one's different from all the other dev and test ones because it has the tie back to production. It has the production data. It has the tie back to the production database, whatever. There's usually some connections there that you're like, wait, that one's way more important. Like, we know production is all connected to all the production stuff. We know we've got dev and test, but I want to know about the dev and test one that has links into maybe where my production data sits, as an example.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about the maturity of this particular market, or even the creation of a brand new market, or if we want to call it that, is really, I think we've gotten to a point in the last 3 to 5 years where the tectonic plate has shifted underneath security, and all or the vast majority of infrastructure and security tools being used are API first and API driven. And that's a fundamental different change as to how we can approach security. Instead of dropping a bunch of point solutions on-prem, we can actually have interoperability and interconnection amongst all of our infrastructure and security tools to pull off all that pertinent asset information into a central repository, and to identify how all those interconnections work in a fully automated way. So instead of having to walk around and stick stickers on everything, we're able to know where everything is. And when you do that, when you interconnect with your entire infrastructure and your entire security tooling, the question of, hey, I have CrowdStrike. Well, great. How many of my endpoints are covered? Well, we can't answer that question. We know we have 10,000 covered, but what's the percentage of coverage? Well, if we start to have a broader approach to how we get those cyber assets in, we can say, here's all your endpoints that don't have CrowdStrike installed, right? Because we have other ways of seeing those endpoints because of the relationships that endpoint is having with other assets, right? And so that's the future of cybersecurity asset management.
And even more importantly, here's the percentage of my assets where I don't know, because we need to get something on that asset. We know it exists, but in most organizations, you'll have some percentage of assets where you don't have the ability to see whether CrowdStrike is on there. Just because you're missing an agent or something like that. Like, there's always this percentage of stuff that's like in this unknown category because it's new, or somebody went around the policies, or BYOD or whatever.
Yeah, and so I think I've said this a few times recently, I think it's a combination of 3 tectonic plates that are making this possible today. The one I already went over with regards to everything being API driven, the fast movement to software defined and cloud, right? Everything becoming cloudified makes everything software defined, in which case asset management on a massive level, like we're talking about, is now possible. And the digital transformation is speeding this market up too, which is why companies like Wiz.io, which plays in this market, got $100 million, as we mentioned in the previous segment, for their A round, because this is a massive thing that companies can tackle.
At what point does something become an asset, though?
It's pliable. It's malleable, right? You can define your assets as granularly as makes sense for you as a business, right? If you don't have the maturity to handle anything other than just knowing where your endpoints are, great. Then, import the data from CrowdStrike and import the data from your AD and import the data from, a few other tools that allow you to just get that level. Right. But if you want to start getting more granular and actually say every commit to my Git repo, my GitHub repo is an asset, and I want to know how all that interconnectivity works on the Git commits for every app, and you want to mature to that level, you can import all of that data and make API asset connections over their APIs to that tooling to increase the graph.
Yeah, like if a user picks up a new device, and that's maybe not an asset yet, until they interact with something that's owned by the enterprise, and maybe right. Like, at what point does it become?
And just to give a specific example there of another type of asset, moving into the critical control number 2, the software assets. I strongly believe probably the biggest point of failure for Equifax when they had their breach was not knowing that they had struts in their environment. I think if you read the articles in the media, you get the impression, they were just slow to patch and they didn't patch it in time, but that wasn't the case at all. They were aware of this vulnerability in struts pretty much from day one, had some big meetings about it, were very worried about it, and looked everywhere for struts, but didn't have the right tooling to discover this one jar library sitting on an old legacy server somewhere. And they used active scanning, DAST scanning, SAST scanning, and everything missed it. And everyone that understood those legacy systems was long gone. Apparently, there wasn't good documentation. They didn't have internal SBOMs. They just didn't know that they had it. And
they're not unique. They're not unique in that situation. I think, as you described that, ourselves and the audience is like, oh wait, yeah, I've definitely been there before. That sounds familiar, right?
And the bad guys from the outside found it before they could find it from the inside, which is kind of embarrassing.
It's not even always just security vulns at the app layer, right? I mean, having that unknown workload pop up. Well, who put that new workload up there? And it's one thing to monitor, and there's CSPM, cloud security posture management tools that monitor for this stuff. But then who put it there? How did it get there? What code was on it? What did the commits look like? All of that stuff, all of those assets play into understanding your environment. And it's understanding those and pulling all those assets into something that you can allow the relationships to provide value.
Getting a hold of the legacy, I think, is also the struggle, right? In this case, the developers maybe had moved on. There was an app. I mean, someone had to know that there was an app running there. It's astonishing that we could run apps.
Yeah, and not they just no longer worked there. That was the problem. So they weren't in any of those meetings where they're like, "Oh crap, we need to find struts."
Gotcha. But someone had to be maintained. I mean, are there apps out there that people don't maintain? Right? That's kind of scary.
Constantly, all over the place, both internal and external.
I mean, you want to bring those developers back, because if something's running with zero maintenance, I want to hire those developers back, right? That was a really well-designed application.
This might just be my memory messing with me, but I want to say it was Sun Equipment, Solaris, JTEE type environment, and some of that stuff, the AIX and Solaris will happily just run forever as long as you don't mess with it or touch it.
Well, I think we'd be remiss not to mention the old Fables that every university in a lot of companies, right, have, that there's the old server that got built into the wall and was still running for years and years and years. And I used to think that was like an actual thing. And then I talked to other people at universities and they'd tell like the same fable. I'm like, wait a minute, like how many servers were accidentally encased in walls at like every single university in this country? Was that like a thing? Did people not pay attention to their servers being enclosed inside of a wall and forgotten about? And how do they get power?
I remember back in the day, everybody on, IRC or whatever the old people chats were that I used to be on, everybody would paste their uptimes. I got a longer uptime. I've got a longer uptime. Now it's like, everything's so ephemeral and moment in time. Uptime's gone. The concept of long uptime doesn't exist. Everything flashes.
Yep.
Well, but it still does in some cases, like Stratus. There are companies that specialize in just that. like being able to hot swap hardware without taking the system down, apply software patches and stuff like that without taking the system down. Stratus OS was specifically built for that purpose, to never be taken offline. And you'd be surprised like how many of those AS400s, mainframe Stratus systems are still out there and business critical in a lot of companies.
Very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we sometimes forget that there is still legacy hardware out there, and still the need to have actual hardware for a lot of businesses, right? I think in technology, we're largely shifting towards newer, ephemeral, DevOps style and containerized in cloud native applications, but it's not everyone. It's not even all the applications at your business, as we evidence, Adrian's point with Equifax. There's still you can't replace all your legacy with the snap of a finger.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about, I think, the security market is, sure, companies like JupyterOne and Wiz and Exonius, right? We're taking this more modern CMDB asset management, cyber asset security approach, but it's a long tail. It's not like the traditional point solutions that can pick up on one of those old ones sitting in a data somewhere. It's not like they're going to go away tomorrow. There's a long tail on a lot of these technologies. And I think that's the thing about cloud that's so exciting from an investment standpoint, either public or private investment standpoint. We're barely tapping the cloud deployment market still, right? And so, if we're going to talk about that side of it, the long tail on all those technologies is there. And all of these companies that are, hey, we're cloud first, cloud native security, which includes ours, have such huge runway over the next 10 to 20 years.
No, you're right. Because one thing that many of us know, and people can tell you in practice when they go pen test or consult or whatever, is that there's a lot of legacy tech out there, right? That's probably why we're called in as consultants oftentimes, right? Because there's a lot of legacy tech, and that eventually will all be moved to the cloud. I guess I could say that. I can say that? I can say that. I guess I just said that. Right? Except for things that require physical presence, I think it makes sense to push them up into the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, everybody that I talk to at an enterprise level, they're not doing anything new in the traditional ways. Everything new is cloud-centric, cloud first. I can't tell you the last time I talked to an enterprise that said, our future projects are all going to be on, AIX in a data center that's in a bunker in Chicago. Right. Like the government might still do that stuff, but every enterprise, small, big, and large, all future projects are going cloud native.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, but then you have to consider, like, our whole next segment, is talking about stuff that can never go to the cloud. SCADA type stuff, ICS stuff, and that stuff is exploding. Like even on the IoT side of that, there's a ton of stuff going into places where we have no visibility into. I'm looking up at my light, which is on Wi-Fi. I control it over the Wi-Fi. There's a whole operating system running on that stupid light, on both these lights here. And, it's convenient for me to be able to control them here. But I don't know what OS they're running. I don't know if they're patched. I don't know if they're talking to Russia, Yeah,
that's a whole other problem when you start to talk about, you're still getting back to the network layer, the network discovery layer version of asset discovery and asset security and management, right? And I think it'll end up being a combination of outside threat intel or threat landscape type players coupled with inside traditional network discovery, whether using modern techniques or not, those type of players, plus the cloud first, cloud native cyber asset management players like JupyterOne, kind of all coming together to provide value in the short term. But I think that market, that space, that product market fit unifies over 10 years.
Yeah. And I think that's the key here, is this is such a broad space. There's so much ground to cover. I remember one of the conversations I had with a company about asset management. They were wanting to do POCs, and they had a spreadsheet where they had something like 70 or 80 different features they were looking for in an asset management product. And I came back to them and I said, you can't even do this with 2 companies. You're going to need at least 3 separate products to be able to do everything on this list.
Yep.
My new coffee maker has Wi-Fi on it, by the way. Speaking of your light bulbs.
Can you give me that IP address, Paul?
Right.
I want to test a few things.
It might. I haven't looked into it. It might only be Bluetooth, but the question is why? Because like I look at the screen of my phone in the app, and then I look at the screen that's on the device, and like it's basically the same thing.
Why wouldn't I just walk up to it and press?
Right.
I think it's kind of like buzzwords in security. Like it's if you have an app for a product that sells better, maybe maybe that helps them make more sales, even if people never end up using the apps.
Right. And the app is really crummy too.
Oh, always.
They're always crashing.
I've seen some
terrible,
horrific, like single-use appliance apps.
They're all terrible. Alrighty. With that, take a short break. Come back. Chris Blask from Unisys coming up next.